The last rays of sun cast long shadows across the dusty trail, as Olivia Evans felt the rough rope bite into her wrists, her heart pounding with each step of the horse dragging her forward. It was 1878, and the New Mexico Territory had never felt more dangerous than it did now, with 3 outlaws leading her toward a fate she couldn't bear to imagine. "Keep moving, Miss Evans," growled Jed Harker, the burliest of the 3 men who had ambushed her stagecoach that morning. "Camp's still a few miles ahead, and the boss is mighty eager to meet the daughter of Judge Evans." Olivia stumbled, her once fine blue traveling dress now torn and covered in the red dust of the territory. At 22, she had been on her way to visit her aunt in Santa Fe when these men had killed the driver, scattered the other passengers, and taken her captive upon learning her identity. Her father had sentenced their leader to hang, and now they wanted revenge. "I can't walk anymore," she said, her voice cracking from thirst and fear. Her honey blonde hair had fallen loose from its pins, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. "Don't much care if you crawl the rest of the way," Harker spat, yanking the rope harder. The evening air was cooling rapidly as it often did in the high desert, and Olivia shivered. Death, she thought, might be preferable to whatever awaited her at the outlaw camp. She had heard whispers about these men, the Harker gang, who terrorized settlements across the territory. Her father's gavel had finally caught up with their leader, sentencing him to hang in 2 weeks' time. Now she was their bargaining chip. The shot came from nowhere, a clean, sharp crack that echoed through the canyon walls. Harker's horse reared as its rider suddenly slumped forward, a dark stain spreading across his back. "Ambush!" shouted another outlaw, reaching for his pistol. 2 more shots in rapid succession, and the remaining outlaws fell. Olivia dropped to the ground, covering her head and waiting for a bullet to find her too. Instead, she heard the steady rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. Through the settling dust, she saw a lone rider emerge from behind a stand of pinyon pines. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a worn leather duster and a hat pulled low over his eyes. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, stepped carefully among the bodies of the fallen outlaws. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace that belied his size. Without a word, he approached Olivia and knelt beside her. Only then could she see his face weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw and the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Miss, are you hurt?" His voice was deep but gentle. "No, not badly," she managed, though her wrists were raw from the ropes and her feet blistered from walking miles in her impractical boots. He drew a knife from his belt and cut her bonds, his movements careful not to touch her skin. "Name's Daniel Xavier. Most folks call me Dax." Olivia rubbed her wrists, wincing. "Olivia Evans. They were taking me to their camp. They wanted to use me against my father." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Judge Evans' daughter," she nodded, suddenly wary. "How do you know that?" "Been tracking this gang for 2 weeks," he said, offering her his canteen. "I'm a bounty hunter. These men have prices on their heads. Didn't know they'd taken you, though. That was fortunate timing." Olivia drank deeply, the water like heaven on her parched throat. "Where were you taking them?" "Chisholm Ranch. Sheriff there's expecting them." Dax checked the bodies efficiently, collecting weapons. "We're about 15 miles out." "Chisholm Ranch," she repeated. She'd heard of it, a growing settlement that had sprung up around John Chisholm's sprawling cattle operation. "I need to get word to my father in Santa Fe. He'll be worried when I don't arrive." Dax nodded. "We'll send a telegram from Chisholm." He glanced at the darkening sky. "But we won't make it there tonight. There's a spot a mile from here where we can camp. You'll be safe." The word "safe" nearly broke her composure. Hours of terror and exhaustion caught up with her, and Olivia felt tears threatening. She blinked them back, refusing to collapse now. Dax pretended not to notice her struggle. Instead, he busied himself securing the outlaws' bodies across their horses. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I grew up on a ranch before my father became a judge." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. He helped her onto his stallion and mounted behind her. With one arm around her waist to steady her, he guided the horse forward, leading the outlaws' mounts behind them. Olivia was acutely aware of his solid presence at her back, the warmth of him a stark contrast to the cooling desert air. For the first time since the stagecoach had been attacked, she allowed herself to breathe. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving my life." His reply was simple. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said, thinking of how the stagecoach driver had been shot without hesitation, how the other passengers had scattered rather than help her. They wouldn't have. Dax didn't respond, but his arm tightened slightly around her waist, whether in acknowledgement or by accident. She couldn't tell. As they rode in silence through the gathering dusk, Olivia realized she had placed her life in the hands of a stranger who killed for money. Yet somehow she felt safer than she had in days. The spot Dax chose for their camp was a small hollow sheltered by boulders and juniper trees, with a clear view of the trail in both directions. He helped her down from the horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Rest," he said. "I'll take care of the horses and get a fire going." Olivia sank down on a flat rock, watching as he efficiently unsaddled the horses and secured the outlaws' bodies a distance from camp. His movements were economical, practiced. This was clearly a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle and under the open sky. As darkness fell completely, he built a small fire and produced jerky, hardtack, and coffee from his saddlebags. Not a feast, but to Olivia's empty stomach, it was manna. "How long have you been a bounty hunter?" she asked as they ate. Dax's face was half illuminated by the firelight, half in shadow. "5 years. And before that, a pause. War, then cattle drives, ranch work." "The war changed many men," she observed. His eyes met hers across the fire. "Yes." She sensed he wouldn't say more on that subject, so she changed course. "My father will reward you for saving me," she said, something hardened in his expression. "I don't need a reward for doing what's right, Miss Evans." "Olivia," she corrected. "Please." After a moment he nodded. "Olivia, then. The bounties on these men, are they substantial enough?" Harker there was worth 500, the others 200 each. She did the calculations in her head. $900, that's more than many men see in years. It's a dangerous job. He sipped his coffee. "Most bounties aren't brought in alive." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the night air. "And those that are, face a judge and jury." His eyes found hers again. "Like your father." Olivia nodded slowly. "My father is a fair man. He only sentences according to the law." "The law?" Dax's laugh was without humor. "Out here, the law is whatever the strongest man says it is." "Is that why you do this? To be the strongest man?" He stared into the fire. "I do it because there are men who prey on the weak. Someone has to stop them." "An avenging angel with a gun," she murmured. This time his laugh was genuine, if brief. "Hardly an angel, Olivia." The way he said her name like it was something precious on his tongue made her heart skip. Ridiculous, she told herself. She was overwrought from the day's events. "You should sleep," he said, rising to add wood to the fire. "We'll leave at first light." "What about you? I'll keep watch." "All night?" she asked, concerned despite herself. He simply nodded, moving to sit with his back against a boulder, rifle across his knees. "I'm used to it." Olivia hesitated, then accepted his bedroll when he offered it. She arranged it near the fire and lay down, suddenly aware of every ache in her body. "Dax," she said softly. "HM, why were you on that trail today? It's not the main route to anywhere." In the silence that followed, she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I heard rumors that the Harker gang was planning something big, been following their trail for days." "Then I truly am fortunate," she said. His silhouette against the starry sky nodded once. "Get some rest, Olivia." Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Each time she woke, she found Dax in the same position, vigilant still, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond their camp. His constancy was reassuring in a way she couldn't articulate, and eventually she drifted into deeper sleep. Dawn came with the distinctive calls of desert birds. Olivia opened her eyes to find Dax already saddling the horses, a fresh pot of coffee steaming by the rekindled fire. His movements were as efficient as ever, but she noticed a slight stiffness that hadn't been there the previous evening. "You didn't sleep at all," she said, sitting up. He glanced over, surprise evident that she had noticed. "Wasn't necessary." Olivia stood, wincing at her stiff muscles and blistered feet. "Everyone needs sleep, Mr. Xavier." "Dax," he corrected, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She accepted the tin cup of coffee he offered. "We're even then. You call me Olivia, I call you Dax." "Fair enough." He studied her face. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Like I've been dragged behind a horse for miles," she admitted ruefully. His expression darkened. "Those men deserved worse than they got." "Death seems adequate punishment," she said quietly. Dax shook his head. "Quick death's too good for men who treat a woman that way." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. There was a story there, she thought, but now wasn't the time to ask. They ate a quick breakfast of more jerky and hardtack before breaking camp. This time, Dax lifted her onto one of the Outlaw's horses, a docile bay mare. "Can you manage?" he asked, handing her the reins. Olivia nodded, gathering her tattered skirts as best she could. "I told you, I grew up riding." "So you did." He mounted his stallion and secured the lead ropes for the horses carrying the dead outlaws. "Chisholm Ranch is about 4 hours' ride. We should be there by midday." The morning was gloriously clear, the kind that made the New Mexico territory famous for its beauty. As they rode side by side, the landscape opened up before them, red rock formations, stands of pinon and juniper, and vast expanses of high desert dotted with sage and yucca. Despite her circumstances, Olivia found herself appreciating the stark beauty around them. "You said you grew up on a ranch," Dax said after they'd ridden in comfortable silence for an hour. "Where was that?" "West Texas," she replied. "My father raised horses before he studied law. We had 5,000 acres along the Brazos River. Good horse country." "The best," she agreed, feeling a pang of nostalgia. "I haven't been back since my mother died and father moved us to Santa Fe 6 years ago. You miss it?" It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "The city has its advantages, but there's something about open spaces that gets into your blood." Dax's eyes scanned the horizon. "Can't imagine living any other way." "No home base?" she asked. "The saddle's my home," he said simply. They rode on, falling into conversation more easily than Olivia would have expected. Dax, for all his initial taciturnity, proved to be knowledgeable about the territory, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of natural lore. He had a quiet intelligence that surprised her, given his chosen profession. By mid-morning, the heat was building, and Olivia's borrowed horse began to lag. Dax noticed immediately and called a halt by a small seep spring tucked among some rocks. "Let the horses drink," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "We could use a break too." Olivia's legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground. Dax caught her elbow, steadying her, and the contact sent an unexpected current through her. "Thank you," she murmured, quickly regaining her composure and moving to the spring. She knelt and splashed cool water on her face, washing away some of the trail dust. When she straightened, she found Dax watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. He quickly looked away, busying himself with checking the horses. "How did you become a bounty hunter?" she asked, curiosity finally getting the better of her. Dax was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Finally," he said, "after the war I drifted. Worked cattle drives, broke horses, did whatever jobs came along. Then one day in Abilene, I saw a wanted poster for a man I recognized, a deserter who'd murdered his lieutenant before running. I tracked him down, turned him in." He shrugged. "Found I had a knack for it. It must be a lonely life." His blue eyes met hers. "Most of the time, that's an advantage. And the rest of the time," something shifted in his gaze, a vulnerability quickly masked. "The rest of the time doesn't matter much." Olivia felt a sadness for this man she barely knew, a sadness that surprised her with its intensity. "Everyone needs connection, Dax. Some men aren't built for it," he said flatly, turning away to fill his canteen. They remounted and continued their journey. The terrain began to change slightly, with more vegetation appearing as they approached the valley where Chisholm Ranch lay. By noon, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance. "There it is," Dax said, "one of the fastest-growing settlements in the territory." Olivia felt a mixture of relief and something like regret. Soon they would reach civilization, and her time with this enigmatic man would end. The thought bothered her more than it should have. As they rode into Chisholm Ranch, heads turned. It wasn't every day a beautiful woman in a torn dress rode in alongside a bounty hunter with 3 dead outlaws in tow. Dax led them directly to the sheriff's office, a substantial adobe building on the town's main street. Sheriff Thomas Wilson was a barrel-chested man with a gray mustache and shrewd eyes. He stepped out onto the boardwalk as they approached, his deputy behind him. "Xavier," he acknowledged with a nod. "See, you found the Harker boys, and they found trouble," Dax replied, dismounting. He helped Olivia down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "This is Miss Olivia Evans, Judge Evans' daughter. The gang took her from a stagecoach, planning to use her against her father." Wilson's eyebrows shot up. "Judge Evans, from Santa Fe?" He removed his hat. "Miss Evans, I'm right sorry for what you've been through. We'll get a telegram to your father straight away." "Thank you, Sheriff," Olivia said, suddenly very aware of her disheveled appearance. "Mrs. Wilson runs the boarding house," the sheriff continued. "She'll set you up with a room and whatever else you need while we wait for word from your father," Dax spoke up. "I'll collect the bounty and be on my way then." Olivia felt a jolt of dismay at his words. "You're leaving? So soon?" His eyes met hers and something passed between them, a current of connection neither had expected. "I have other bounties to collect," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Sheriff Wilson was counting out money from the safe. $900, Xavier. You've done the territory a service taking these 3 out of action." Dax pocketed the money with a nod of thanks, but his gaze kept returning to Olivia. She stood straighter, despite her exhaustion and dishevelment. "At least stay for a proper meal," she said. "You've had nothing but jerky for days," Wilson chuckled. "She's right, Xavier. Lucy's serving stew at the boarding house today, best in the territory." A conflict played out on Dax's face. Finally, he nodded. "One meal." The Wilsons' boarding house was a welcoming 2-story adobe structure with a wide porch and flowering vines climbing its walls. Mrs. Lucy Wilson was a plump, efficient woman who took one look at Olivia and immediately set about mothering her. "You poor dear. What those villains put you through." she exclaimed, ushering Olivia upstairs. "I'll draw you a hot bath and find you some clean clothes. One of my boarders is about your size." An hour later, Olivia descended the stairs feeling transformed. She had bathed, her hair was clean and neatly braided, and she wore a borrowed calico dress that fit well enough. The blisters on her feet had been treated with salve, and her raw wrists bandaged. In the dining room, she found Dax seated at a table, looking uncomfortable among the other boarders. He had clearly made an effort to clean up as well. His face was freshly shaven, his dark hair damp and combed back. He wore the same clothes, but they had been brushed free of dust. He stood when she entered, his eyes widening slightly. "Olivia," he said, the word almost reverent. "You look more human without a week's worth of trail dust," she remarked with a smile, taking the seat across from him. A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "As do you." Mrs. Wilson served them generous bowls of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. It was the best meal Olivia had eaten in memory, though she suspected her gratitude for being alive enhanced the flavors. They ate in companionable silence, both too hungry for conversation at first. When they had satisfied the worst of their hunger, Dax spoke. "Sheriff Wilson sent the telegram." "Your father should receive it by now." Olivia nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "What will you do now?" Dax's eyes met hers across the table. "Move on. There's word of the Carson brothers causing trouble near Taos, more bounties. It's what I do. Is it all you want to do?" She asked softly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked down at his empty bowl, considering. Never gave much thought to wanting anything else. "Everyone wants something, Dax." When he looked up again, there was an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. "What do you want, Olivia Evans?" The directness of his question surprised her. I'm not sure anymore. Before yesterday I thought I knew. Visit my aunt, return to Santa Fe, perhaps marry one of the lawyers from my father's circle." She shook her head. "It all seems so hollow now." "Near death has a way of changing perspectives," he said with the hint of a smile. "Yes." She studied his face, noting the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar along his jaw. "What did you want? Before the war, before all this?" Dax was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Land. A horse ranch like my grandfather had in Kentucky before it was lost." "You could have that," she said. $900 is a good start." He shook his head. "That's not for me anymore." "Why not?" Again, that penetrating gaze. "Some paths, once you start down them, don't lead back, Olivia." Before she could respond, Sheriff Wilson appeared at their table. "Telegram from Judge Evans, Miss Olivia. He's sending a deputy marshal to escort you to Santa Fe. Should arrive day after tomorrow on the morning stage." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, accepting the paper. "Xavier, a word." Wilson motioned Dax outside. Dax excused himself and followed the sheriff, leaving Olivia to read her father's message. It was brief, and to the point: relief at her safety, gratitude to her rescuer, an assurance that she would soon be brought home. Through the window, she could see Dax and Sheriff Wilson in serious conversation on the porch. Wilson was gesturing emphatically, while Dax stood with arms crossed, shaking his head. Finally, he seemed to relent, nodding once. When he returned to the table, his expression was troubled. "Is something wrong?" Olivia asked. "Sheriff has information that the rest of the Harker gang is planning to break their leader out of the Santa Fe jail before his hanging," Dax said. "He's asked me to ride with the deputy marshal when he takes you back." Her heart leapt at the news, though she tried not to show it. "And will you?" Dax's eyes held hers. "Yes." "Because there might be bounties?" she asked, unable to keep a hint of disappointment from her voice. "Because you'll be safer with 2 guns instead of 1, he corrected. "And because—" He trailed off, seeming to struggle with words, a rare occurrence for him. She was beginning to realize. "Because," she prompted. "Because I'm not ready to say goodbye just yet," he admitted quietly. The simple honesty of his statement touched her more than flowery declarations ever could have. Olivia found herself smiling. "Neither am I." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of connection neither had expected to find. "Will you show me the town?" she asked impulsively. "I've been cooped up in stage coaches and now a boarding house. I could use some fresh air." Dax hesitated, his protective instincts visible in the furrow of his brow. "You should rest." "I've rested," she countered. "Please, Dax, just a short walk." He could no more resist her request than he could have stopped breathing. "All right. But we stay on the main street, and you tell me if you get tired." Chisholm Ranch was a bustling settlement, with businesses lining the main thoroughfare: a general store, saloon, blacksmith, land office, and the beginnings of a proper bank being constructed at the far end. Cattle was the primary business, but with the railroad spur line coming through, the town was growing rapidly. They walked side by side, close but not touching, aware of curious eyes upon them. Olivia reveled in the simple pleasure of movement without fear, of the sun on her face and the company of a man who had saved her life. At the general store, Dax insisted on buying her a proper hat to shield her from the sun. When he placed it gently on her head, his fingers brushed her temple, and the contact sent a current of awareness through them both. "Thank you," she said softly. His only response was a nod, but his eyes said more than words could have. They continued their walk, pausing to watch a wrangler breaking a spirited mustang in a corral behind the livery. Dax leaned against the fence, his posture relaxed for the first time since Olivia had met him. "You have an eye for horseflesh," the wrangler called out, noticing Dax's attention. "Used to break horses before the war," Dax replied. "Could use a man with experience. Mr. Chisholm's always looking for good hands." Dax smiled but shook his head. "Just passing through." As they walked away, Olivia said, "You could stay, you know. Towns like this are always growing, always need skilled men." "Is that what you want?" he asked, studying her face. "For me to settle here?" The directness of his question startled her. I only meant that you have options, if you wanted something different than bounty hunting." They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country. In the distance, the mountains were turning purple with the approach of evening. 2 days, Dax said, seemingly to himself. "Until the marshal comes," Olivia confirmed, feeling a twist of something like grief. In 2 days, she would return to Santa Fe, to her father's world of law books and proper society. And Dax would move on to his next bounty, his next solitary camp beneath the stars, unless the thought formed before she could examine it too closely. "Come to dinner tonight," she said suddenly. Mrs. Wilson mentioned a small private dining room for special occasions. Dax raised an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" Olivia smiled. "Being alive." They returned to the boarding house as the sun began to set, the sky painted in spectacular oranges and pinks. Mrs. Wilson was delighted by Olivia's request for a private dinner, and set about preparing the small parlor at the back of the house, usually reserved for family gatherings. By 7 o'clock, the table was set with the Wilson family's best china, a small vase of wildflowers at its center. Candles cast a warm glow over the room, making it feel intimate and separate from the world outside. Dax arrived promptly, looking uncomfortable in his clean but well-worn clothes. He had made an effort, though his boots were polished, his hair neatly combed. When he saw Olivia waiting for him, something in his expression softened. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Olivia blushed. She wore the same borrowed calico dress, but Mrs. Wilson had helped her arrange her hair in a more becoming style with soft tendrils framing her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson served them roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh vegetables, then tactfully withdrew, leaving them alone. For a time they ate in companionable silence, the events of the past 2 days making small talk seem inadequate. Finally, Dax set down his fork. "Why did you ask me here tonight, Olivia?" The directness of his question didn't surprise her anymore. It was part of who he was. "Because I wanted to know you better," she admitted, "before we go our separate ways." "Is that what will happen? Separate ways?" Her heart quickened at the question. "Isn't it? You have your bounties, and I have my father's house in Santa Fe." Dax's gaze was steady. "What if there could be something else?" "Like what?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I've been alone so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." He met her eyes across the candlelight. "But being with you makes me want to try." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes at his honesty. "We've known each other 2 days, Dax. Some things don't need time. Sometimes you just know." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "The moment I saw you on that trail, even before I knew who you were, something changed for me." She placed her hand in his, the contact sending warmth up her arm. "For me, too." His fingers closed around hers, strong and calloused from years of hard work. "I have nothing to offer you, Olivia. No home, no position in society." "I don't care about those things," she said fiercely. "Not anymore. Yesterday showed me how quickly life can change, how fragile everything is." "Your father might have other ideas," Dax pointed out. "A bounty hunter is hardly a suitable match for a judge's daughter." "My father wants my happiness above all else," she said, though doubt crept into her voice. Judge Evans was indeed a loving father, but he also had firm ideas about suitable society. Dax seemed to sense her uncertainty. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Let's get you safely back to Santa Fe first, then we can see what might be possible." The practicality of his approach was reassuring. Olivia nodded, though her heart ached with the possibility that this connection, this unexpected, profound connection, might be lost before it had a chance to fully form. After dinner, they walked in the small garden behind the boarding house. The night air was cool, the sky ablaze with stars. They stood side by side, looking up at the vastness above them. "I never tire of this view," Dax said softly. "No matter where I am, the stars are constant. Is that why you prefer sleeping outdoors? To see the stars?" He smiled. "Partly. And partly because 4 walls start to feel like a prison after a while. Even on the coldest nights." "Even then," he confirmed. "Though I'll admit, the boarding house bed was welcome last night." Olivia laughed. "After not sleeping at all the night before, I should think so." His expression grew serious. "I would have stayed awake a week to keep you safe." The simple declaration stole her breath. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Dax." He turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "Olivia, I'm not a man of many words, never have been, but these past 2 days." He struggled, searching for the right way to express himself. "I've been wandering since the war ended. For the first time, I feel like I've found something worth stopping for." Her heart hammered in her chest. "I feel it too," she whispered. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head. Their lips met in a kiss so gentle it nearly broke her heart. A question, an offering, a promise. Olivia leaned into it, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, his eyes searched hers in the starlight. "I should go," he said, though he made no move to release her. "Yes," she agreed, equally reluctant to end the moment, Finally, he stepped back, his hand sliding from hers with obvious reluctance. "Tomorrow, I'll check in with Sheriff Wilson, make sure everything's arranged for the deputy marshal's arrival. And then we go to Santa Fe," he said. "Together." The word held such promise that Olivia couldn't help smiling. "Together," she echoed. She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the starlit sky, and felt a certainty settle in her soul. Whatever came next, her life had changed irrevocably on that dusty trail, and not just because of the danger she had faced, but because of the man who had saved her from it. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Sheriff Wilson received confirmation that Deputy Marshal Patrick Riley would arrive on the morning stage, and plans were made for the journey to Santa Fe. Dax spent the day checking and cleaning his weapons, acquiring extra ammunition, and studying maps of the territory with the sheriff, identifying possible ambush points along their route. Olivia, meanwhile, was taken under Mrs. Wilson's wing. The kind woman helped her select fabric from the general store to make a traveling outfit more suitable than the borrowed dress. As they worked together at Mrs. Wilson's sewing machine, Olivia found herself confiding in the older woman about her feelings for Dax. "It's happened so quickly," she admitted as she hemmed a sleeve. "Is it foolish to feel this way about someone I've only just met?" Mrs. Wilson smiled knowingly. "My Thomas proposed the day after we met back in '52. Been married 26 years now, and I've never regretted saying yes." She patted Olivia's hand. "The heart knows what it wants, dear. Sometimes it just takes the mind a while to catch up. But Dax's life is so different from mine. He's a bounty hunter, always on the move. I've always lived in towns, in society. Life has a way of meeting in the middle, Mrs. Wilson said wisely. "If you both want it badly enough." That evening, Dax and Olivia dined with the Wilsons and the other boarders, their connection obvious to everyone despite their efforts at discretion. Sheriff Wilson regaled them with tales of the early days of Chisholm Ranch, when John Chisholm's cattle empire was just beginning to take shape. "This whole valley was nothing but open range 10 years ago," he said, gesturing expansively. "Now look at us. Bank coming in, railroad spur line next year. We'll be a proper city before you know it." "You've seen a lot of changes," Dax observed. "And more coming," Wilson agreed. "Territory will be a state within the decade, mark my words. Law and order's coming to the west one way or another, putting bounty hunters out of business." Olivia asked with a small smile in Dax's direction. Wilson chuckled. "Well, I reckon there'll always be work for men who know how to handle trouble. Marshals need deputies, towns need sheriffs. Law enforcement," Dax said thoughtfully, as if considering the idea for the first time. After dinner, Dax and Olivia once again walked in the garden, the ritual already feeling familiar and precious. "You'd make a good lawman," she said, picking up the thread from dinner. "You already bring in criminals, just with a different title." Dax looked skeptical. "There's a big difference between hunting bounties and wearing a badge, Olivia." "Is there? Both require courage, skill with weapons, and a sense of justice. And following orders," he added. "I've never been good at that part," she laughed. "I can believe that." Their hands found each other easily now, fingers intertwining as if they'd been doing it for years rather than days. They walked in comfortable silence for a time, both aware that tomorrow would bring change: the arrival of the deputy marshal, the journey to Santa Fe, and whatever awaited them there. "I spoke with the land office today," Dax said suddenly. Olivia looked up at him in surprise. "You did?" He nodded, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "There's a small ranch for sale about 10 miles outside Chisholm Ranch. 200 acres, good water rights. House needs work, but the land is solid." Her heart began to race. "Dax, are you saying—" I'm saying I've been thinking, he cut in gently, about what you asked, about what I want. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. I want a life that includes you, Olivia Evans. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know I want the chance to find out. Tears sprang to her eyes. I want that too. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn leather pouch. I've carried this since the war, he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. It was my mother's. My father gave it to me before I left for the fighting, said to give it to the woman who made me want to come home again. Olivia's breath caught as Dax took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm not asking for an answer now, he said. I know it's too soon and there's your father to consider and 100 other things, but I want you to know my intentions. When we get to Santa Fe, I aim to speak to your father properly. Dax, she whispered, overwhelmed by emotion. Is that too forward? He asked, suddenly uncertain. I'm not well versed in society's rules. In answer, Olivia rose on tiptoes and kissed him, pouring all her feelings into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathless, she smiled through her tears. It's perfect. He slipped the ring back into the pouch and returned it to his pocket. For safekeeping, he said. Until the time is right. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, both aware that tomorrow would bring challenges, but facing them with newfound hope for the future. The morning stage arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, dust billowing around the 6-horse team as it pulled into Chisholm Ranch's Main Street. Deputy Marshal Patrick Riley was a compact, wiry man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He greeted Sheriff Wilson with a firm handshake before turning his attention to Olivia and Dax. Miss Evans, he said, tipping his hat respectfully. Your father's been worried sick. Glad to see you're all right. Thank you, Marshal Riley, Olivia replied. Mr. Xavier is the one you should thank. He saved my life. Riley's gaze shifted to Dax, assessing the bounty hunter with a professional eye. Xavier, heard of you. Good with a gun, they say. Dax nodded once, neither confirming nor denying the reputation. Sheriff Wilson tells me you'll be riding along to Santa Fe, Riley continued. That's right. Any particular reason? Dax's eyes briefly met Olivia's before returning to Riley. The Harker gang might try something. Better to have 2 guns than 1. Riley studied him a moment longer, then nodded. Fair enough. We leave in an hour. Need to change out these horses and get fresh ones for the journey. As Riley and Wilson walked toward the livery to arrange for horses, Olivia turned to Dax. He doesn't seem entirely pleased with the arrangement. Lawmen and bounty hunters don't always see eye to eye, Dax explained with a slight smile. He'll warm up once he sees I can handle myself. They spent the next hour making final preparations. Mrs. Wilson had finished Olivia's new traveling outfit, a practical split skirt and jacket in sturdy brown cotton that would allow her to ride astride comfortably. She'd also packed a small bundle of provisions for the journey. You come back and visit us, you hear, Mrs. Wilson said, embracing Olivia warmly. Both of you, she added with a meaningful look at Dax. By 10 o'clock, they were mounted and ready to depart, Olivia on the same bay mare she'd ridden from the wilderness, Dax on his chestnut stallion, and Riley on a solid gray gelding. The journey to Santa Fe would take 2 days, with an overnight stop at a way station near Glorietta Pass. Sheriff Wilson saw them off with final warnings about the trail ahead. Keep your eyes open, he cautioned. The rest of the Harker gang won't take kindly to losing their men. We'll be careful, Riley assured him. Judge Evans' daughter will reach Santa Fe safely, or I'm not fit to wear this badge. They set out under a clear blue sky, the day already warming rapidly. Riley took the lead, with Olivia in the middle and Dax bringing up the rear, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape for any sign of trouble. The first few hours passed uneventfully, with Riley maintaining a brisk pace. Around midday, they stopped by a creek to water the horses and eat a quick meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. Olivia was grateful for the rest, though she was an experienced rider. The pace was taxing after her ordeal. "You're holding up well," Dax observed quietly, sitting beside her in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "I'm tougher than I look," she replied with a smile. "So I've noticed." His eyes held warm admiration that made her heart flutter. Riley approached, having checked the surrounding area. "We should move out soon. I want to reach the foothills before dark." As they continued their journey, the terrain began to change, becoming more varied and offering more places for potential ambush. Dax's vigilance increased, his hand never far from his revolver. Riley, too, seemed more alert, his head turning constantly as he assessed their surroundings. Late in the afternoon, as they navigated a narrow section of trail flanked by steep embankments, Dax suddenly raised his hand. "Hold up," he called softly. Riley reined in his mount, looking back with a frown. "What is it?" Dax nodded toward the ridge to their right. "Movement up there, just for a second." All three stared at the rocky outcropping. For several long moments, nothing moved. Then a small cascade of pebbles tumbled down the slope. "Could be an animal," Riley said, though his hand moved to his holster. "Could be," Dax agreed, "but I don't think so." He turned to Olivia. "Stay close to Riley. If there's trouble, ride hard for that stand of trees about 100 yards ahead. Don't stop no matter what you hear." Fear clutched at her heart. "Dax, promise me, Olivia," he insisted, his blue eyes intense. "I promise," she whispered. Dax nodded once, then slowly dismounted, handing her his reins. "I'm going to circle around, come up behind whoever's up there." Riley looked like he wanted to object but thought better of it. "I'll keep her safe down here," he said instead. With a final glance at Olivia, Dax disappeared into the scrub brush alongside the trail, moving with a stealth that spoke of years of experience in stalking prey, human or otherwise. Minutes stretched like hours as Olivia and Riley waited, the only sounds the occasional stamp of a hoof or the call of a distant bird. Olivia strained her eyes toward the ridge, willing Dax to reappear, safe and unharmed. The shot, when it came, was deafening in the stillness, a single crack that echoed off the canyon walls. It was followed immediately by two more in rapid succession. "Go," Riley shouted, drawing his revolver. "Ride for those trees." Olivia hesitated for just a moment, torn between her promise to Dax and her fear for his safety. Then training and survival instinct took over. She dug her heels into her mare's sides and galloped forward, Dax's stallion following on the lead rein. Behind her, she heard Riley firing his weapon toward the ridge. She reached the trees and dismounted quickly, tying both horses to a low branch before drawing the small derringer Mrs. Wilson had insisted she carry. Her hands shook as she peered back toward the trail, trying to see what was happening. More gunfire echoed through the canyon, at least 3 different weapons, she thought. One would be Riley's, but who was exchanging fire with whom? Then silence fell, more terrifying than the gunshots had been. Olivia held her breath, straining to hear any sound that would tell her what had happened. Had Dax been shot? Was Riley injured? Were the ambushers approaching her hiding place even now? She gripped the derringer tighter, determined to defend herself if necessary, but praying it wouldn't come to that. The small gun held only 2 shots, barely enough to deter a determined attacker. "Olivia," Dax's voice, calling from the direction of the trail. Relief flooded through her, but she remained cautious. "Here," she called back softly. "In the trees." A moment later, Dax appeared, Riley just behind him. Both men were intact, though Riley had a shallow graze along his upper arm that was bleeding sluggishly. "Thank God," she breathed, hurrying to meet them. "What happened?" Two of the Harker gang, Dax explained, his expression grim. "They were waiting to ambush us. Did you?" She couldn't finish the question. "One's dead," Riley said matter-of-factly. "The other got away, but he's wounded." "Won't get far." Dax's eyes searched Olivia's face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, fighting back tears of relief. "Just scared." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did exactly right. Kept your head, followed instructions." Riley was checking his wounded arm. "We need to keep moving," he said. "That runner might have friends nearby." "Let me bandage that first," Olivia said, gesturing to his injury. She retrieved a clean handkerchief from her saddlebag and deftly wrapped it around Riley's arm. "You've done that before," the deputy marshal observed. "I volunteered with the medical corps during the last year of the war," she explained. "Mostly rolling bandages and writing letters, but I learned a few things." Riley nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "Much obliged." They mounted up again, with Dax now taking the lead and Riley, despite his injury, insisting on riding as rear guard. They pushed the horses harder now, aware that other members of the gang could be nearby. By nightfall, they reached the way station at Glorietta, past a fortified adobe building that served as both stagecoach stop and trading post. The station keeper, a grizzled man named Hank Johnson, welcomed them with a nod. "Marshal," he acknowledged Riley. "Got your message from Santa Fe. Rooms are ready. Horses will be tended to." Inside, the way station was sparse but clean, with a common room for meals and separate sleeping quarters. Johnson's wife, Martha, served them a hearty stew with fresh bread, which they ate in relative silence, the day's events weighing heavily on them. After the meal, Riley drew Johnson aside to discuss security arrangements for the night. Dax and Olivia found themselves alone at the table, their knees touching beneath it. "I was so afraid," Olivia admitted quietly, "when I heard the shots." Dax's hand found hers under the table. "I know. I'm sorry you had to go through that. It's not your fault." She squeezed his fingers. "If anything, I'm the one who brought this danger on us all." He shook his head firmly. "The only ones to blame are the Harker gang, not you, never you." Their eyes held in silent communication, both aware that the events of the day had only strengthened the bond forming between them. Riley returned to the table, interrupting the moment. "Johnson's setting up watches for the night. I'll take the first, Xavier. You can relieve me at midnight." Dax nodded. "I'll be ready." "Miss Evans, your room is the first on the right down that hall," Riley continued. "No windows, solid door with a good lock. You'll be safe there." "Thank you, Marshal," she said. "Best get some rest now," Riley advised. "We leave at first light. Santa Fe by nightfall tomorrow if all goes well." Olivia stood, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline of the day's events had worn off, leaving her drained. "Good night, then." Dax's eyes followed her as she walked toward the hallway. Just before she turned the corner, she glanced back to find him still watching her, his expression a mixture of tenderness and concern that warmed her despite her fatigue. Her room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, washstand, and chair. A lantern provided warm, golden light. Olivia washed as best she could with the basin of water provided, then changed into the nightgown Mrs. Wilson had packed for her. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Every creak of the building, every distant sound had her sitting up, heart racing. The ambush had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, reminding her forcefully of how quickly life could change or end. After an hour of tossing and turning, she heard a soft knock at her door. "Olivia," Dax's voice, pitched low so as not to disturb the others. "Are you awake?" She rose and went to the door, opening it just enough to see him standing there, concern etched on his features. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Neither could I," he said. "Not until my watch, anyway." They stood there for a moment, separated by the partially open door, both aware of the impropriety of their situation yet reluctant to part. "Would you?" Olivia hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Would you sit with me for a while, just until I fall asleep?" Dax glanced down the hallway, then back at her. "Are you sure?" she nodded, stepping back to allow him entry. He slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. If anyone saw, there would be talk, but in that moment, Olivia couldn't bring herself to care. The events of the past days had shifted her perspective on what truly mattered. Dax took the chair, positioning it beside the bed as Olivia climbed back under the covers. His presence was reassuring, solid, a bulwark against the fear that had kept sleep at bay. "Tell me something," she said softly. "Something about your life before. Something good." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Then, my grandfather's horse ranch in Kentucky," he began, his voice a low, soothing rumble in the quiet room. "It was in a valley with rolling hills, the bluest grass you've ever seen. In spring, the whole place would be covered in wildflowers, bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, black-eyed Susans." As he spoke, painting pictures of a peaceful life before war and hardship had reshaped him, Olivia felt herself relaxing. His voice washed over her, carrying her toward sleep like a gentle current. The last thing she remembered was the feeling of his calloused hand taking hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm as consciousness slipped away. She woke to early morning light filtering through the cracks around the door. The chair beside her bed was empty, but a single wildflower, a delicate mountain columbine, lay on the pillow beside her. Dax must have found it during his watch and left it for her to find. Olivia pressed the flower between the pages of the small Bible Mrs. Wilson had given her, preserving this small token of tenderness. Breakfast was a hurried affair, with all three travelers eager to reach Santa Fe before nightfall. Johnson reported no disturbances during the night, but Riley remained cautious. "The hardest part of the journey is ahead," he warned as they mounted up. "The trail through Glorietta Pass offers plenty of places for ambush." Dax nodded in agreement. "We'll keep formation as before, but tighter. Any sign of trouble, we ride hard for the next clearing." The morning was crisp and clear as they set out, the sun just beginning to warm the air. The trail wound upward through Glorietta Pass, the site of a decisive Civil War battle that had prevented Confederate forces from claiming the Western territories. Now, 15 years later, the pass was peaceful again, though no less dangerous for travelers who might encounter bandits or hostile natives. They rode in watchful silence, all three scanning the surrounding terrain constantly. The hours passed without incident, and by midday, they had cleared the pass and begun the descent toward the high plateau where Santa Fe lay. It was during their brief stop to rest the horses that Riley finally addressed what had been on his mind since Chisholm Ranch. "Xavier," he said, as Olivia walked a short distance away to stretch her legs. "What's your real interest in escorting Miss Evans to Santa Fe?" Dax met the lawman's gaze steadily. "You know about the Harker gang's plans." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." Riley's tone was direct but not accusatory. "I've seen how you look at her, how she looks at you." For a moment, Dax considered deflection, then decided on honesty. "I have honorable intentions toward Miss Evans. When we reach Santa Fe, I plan to speak with her father." Riley's eyebrows rose. "Judge Evans is one of the most respected men in the territory. You think he'll welcome a bounty hunter as a suitor for his daughter?" "Probably not," Dax admitted. "But that's between me and the judge." The deputy marshal studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You saved her life. That counts for something, but be prepared for resistance." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think you'd be good for her. She needs someone steady, someone who understands the real world beyond society parlors." Before Dax could respond, Olivia returned, and the conversation shifted back to their journey. They mounted up and continued toward Santa Fe, the landscape gradually changing from rugged mountains to the high desert plateau that surrounded the territorial capital. By late afternoon, they could see Santa Fe in the distance, its adobe buildings gleaming golden in the slanting sunlight. Olivia felt a complex mixture of emotions as her home came into view: relief at having survived the journey, apprehension about facing her father, and a deep sadness at the thought that her time with Dax might soon come to an end. As if sensing her thoughts, Dax brought his horse alongside hers. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She managed a small smile. "Just thinking about what comes next." His eyes held hers, steady and reassuring. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The promise in those simple words sustained her as they rode into Santa Fe, the territorial capital busy with activity even as evening approached. Riley led them directly to the courthouse, a substantial building that also housed the marshal's office. Outside, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s paced anxiously, his silver hair and neatly trimmed beard immediately identifying him to Dax as Judge Evans. "Papa," Olivia called, spurring her horse forward. Judge Arthur Evans turned at the sound of his daughter's voice, his stern face transforming with relief. "Olivia, thank God!" he exclaimed as she dismounted and ran to embrace him. Dax hung back, watching the reunion with mixed emotions. The obvious love between father and daughter was touching, but the judge's fine clothes and authoritative bearing highlighted the gulf between his world and Dax's. Riley dismounted and approached the judge, offering a formal report of their journey while Olivia continued to reassure her father that she was unharmed. Finally, Judge Evans turned his attention to Dax, who had dismounted but remained beside his horse. "And you must be Mr. Xavier," the judge said, his voice carrying the weight of authority even in gratitude. "I understand I owe you a debt of thanks for rescuing my daughter." Dax stepped forward, meeting the older man's gaze directly. "No debt, Your Honor. I did what anyone would have done." "But it wasn't anyone, was it? It was you." Judge Evans extended his hand. "You have my sincere gratitude, Mr. Xavier." Dax shook the offered hand, aware of Olivia watching them both anxiously. "Your daughter is a remarkable woman, sir. She showed great courage throughout the ordeal." Pride shone in the judge's eyes as he looked at Olivia. "That she is." He turned back to Dax. "I insist you join us for dinner this evening. It's the least I can do to thank you properly." Before Dax could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the jail, which stood adjacent to the courthouse. Shouts and the sound of running feet drew everyone's attention. "Judge!" A young deputy burst from the jail doors, face flushed with alarm. "The prisoner Harker, he's got a gun." "One of his gang must have slipped it to him during visiting hours." Judge Evans paled. "Clear the street," he ordered. "Riley, get my daughter to safety." But it was too late. The jail doors slammed open and a man emerged, tall, gaunt, with the cold eyes of a rattlesnake. In one hand he held a revolver, in the other he gripped the shirt of a terrified clerk he was using as a shield. "Well, well," Harker drawled, his gaze finding the group outside the courthouse. "Looks like my timing's perfect." Judge Evans himself, and if I'm not mistaken, the lovely Miss Evans as well. Dax had moved instinctively in front of Olivia, his hand on his holstered revolver. Riley stood to their left, his own weapon drawn but unable to fire with the clerk in the line of fire. "Let him go, Harker," Judge Evans commanded, his voice steady despite the situation. "There's no way out for you." Harker laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "I'd say I'm the one giving orders now, Judge. And my first order is for everyone to drop their weapons, or this fellow gets a third eye right between his current two." The clerk whimpered, his face ashen with fear. "Do as he says," Judge Evans instructed reluctantly. Riley hesitated, then slowly placed his revolver on the ground. Dax, however, didn't move. "You too, mister," Harker snapped, pressing his gun harder against the clerk's temple. "Dax," Olivia whispered urgently. "Please." After a long, tense moment, Dax slowly removed his revolver and set it down, though he remained positioned protectively in front of Olivia. Harker's thin lips curved in a triumphant smile. "Now, here's how this is going to work. The judge's daughter is coming with me insurance for my safe passage out of the territory. Once I'm clear, I'll release her." His cold eyes locked with Olivia's. "Maybe." "No," Judge Evans said firmly. "Take me instead." "An old man. No thanks." Harker gestured with his gun. "The girl, or I start shooting bystanders, beginning with this clerk." Dax's mind raced, assessing options, angles, timing. Harker was 15 feet away, partially shielded by the clerk. Any move would put the hostage and potentially Olivia at risk, but doing nothing was not an option. "Wait," he said, raising his hand slightly. "You don't know me, Harker, but I know you. I'm the one who killed 3 of your men a few days ago." Harker's attention shifted, his eyes narrowing. "You're the bounty hunter, Xavier." "That's right." Dax took a small step forward, drawing Harker's focus more fully onto himself. "Those men died badly, screaming." Rage flashed across Harker's face. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask your runner, the one who got away from Glorietta Pass yesterday." "Oh wait, you can't." He bled out before he could reach help. This was a bluff. Dax had no idea what had happened to the wounded gang member, but it had the desired effect. Harker's composure cracked, his focus wavering just enough. "You son of a—" It was all the opening Dax needed. In one fluid motion, he dropped to a crouch, snatched up his revolver, and fired a single, precise shot that caught Harker in the shoulder of his gun arm. The outlaw's weapon discharged harmlessly into the air as he staggered backward, losing his grip on the clerk. Riley moved instantly, tackling Harker to the ground while deputies swarmed from the courthouse. Within seconds, the outlaw was subdued, disarmed, and being dragged back toward the jail, cursing viciously. Dax holstered his weapon and turned to find Olivia staring at him, her face pale but composed. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, then surprised him by stepping forward and embracing him tightly, regardless of who might be watching. "You could have been killed," she whispered against his chest. His arms came around her, holding her close. "Wasn't going to let him take you," he said simply. When they finally separated, they found Judge Evans watching them with an unreadable expression. The judge had observed not only Dax's quick thinking and marksmanship, but also the way his daughter had turned to this man for comfort, and the way the bounty hunter had looked at Olivia with such fierce protectiveness. "Mr. Xavier," Judge Evans said, his voice carefully neutral. "I believe we were discussing dinner. After what's just occurred, I insist even more strongly that you join us." Dax met the judge's evaluating gaze. "I'd be honored, Your Honor." The Evans home was a substantial adobe hacienda on the outskirts of Santa Fe, its design reflecting the blending of Spanish and Anglo influences that characterized the territory. A housekeeper greeted them at the door, her exclamations of relief at Olivia's safe return shifting rapidly to efficient management of the household. Within an hour, a hot bath had been drawn for Olivia, clean clothes laid out, and a guest room prepared for Dax. "Dinner will be served at 7, Judge Evans informed Dax, leading him to the study for a drink while Olivia went to refresh herself. "I hope you'll be comfortable until then." The study was lined with bookshelves, the walls adorned with maps of the territory and framed legal documents. It was the room of a man who believed in law, order, and civilization concepts that sometimes seemed abstract in the wild spaces where Dax operated. Judge Evans poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Dax. "Deputy Marshal Riley gave me a full account of your journey," he said. "He speaks highly of your abilities." "Riley's a good man," Dax replied. "Knows his business, as do you, apparently." The judge studied him over the rim of his glass. "Riley also mentioned something else, something about your intentions toward my daughter." Dax had expected this conversation, though perhaps not so soon. He met the judge's gaze directly. "I care for Olivia deeply, sir. I know it seems sudden, but sometimes life shows you what matters in unexpected ways." "Indeed." Judge Evans set down his glass. "Mr. Xavier, let me be direct. You've saved my daughter's life, and for that I will be eternally grateful. But you must understand my concerns. You're a bounty hunter, a dangerous, unstable profession. Olivia has been raised in society, educated in the finest schools back east. The life you could offer her would be different," Dax finished when the judge trailed off. "I understand that. I don't have much to offer in terms of position or wealth. But I can promise you this. I would protect her with my life, respect her as an equal, and do everything in my power to make her happy." Judge Evans raised an eyebrow. "Noble sentiments, but practical considerations matter as well. What would you do to support a family? Where would you live?" These were fair questions, and Dax had been considering them since his conversation with Olivia in the garden at Chisholm Ranch. "I've been thinking about settling down," he said. "There's a small ranch outside Chisholm Ranch that's for sale. Good land, water rights. I have enough saved for a down payment. Ranching is hard work with uncertain returns," the judge pointed out. "I'm not afraid of hard work, sir. And I have other skills. Sheriff Wilson mentioned the town's growing fast. They'll need deputies, marshals." This seemed to catch the judge's interest. "You'd consider law enforcement a more legitimate application of your skills, if it meant building a life with Olivia, yes." Judge Evans was silent for a long moment, studying the younger man with shrewd eyes that had evaluated countless witnesses and defendants over the years. Finally, he said, "My daughter has always had a mind of her own. If she's set her heart on you, I doubt anything I say will dissuade her." He raised a hand when Dax began to speak. "However, I would ask for one thing: time. Give yourselves time to be certain this is more than the intensity of shared danger." Dax considered this request, finding it reasonable. "How much time?" "6 months," the judge proposed, "during which you establish yourself, whether in Chisholm Ranch or elsewhere, in a stable position. Prove that you can offer my daughter security as well as affection." It was a fair condition, more generous than Dax had expected. "I can agree to that, sir." "Good." Judge Evans extended his hand. "Then we understand each other." As they shook hands, Dax felt something shift between them, not quite approval yet, but a willingness to consider the possibility that a bounty hunter might, after all, be worthy of a judge's daughter. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Olivia refreshed and radiant in a simple but elegant blue dress, dominating the conversation with questions about events in Santa Fe during her absence. Judge Evans indulged her, clearly relieved to have his daughter safely home. Dax spoke little, content to observe Olivia in her natural environment, noting how she moved with easy grace through the well-appointed dining room, so different from the trail-weary woman he had first encountered. After the meal, Olivia suggested a walk in the garden. Judge Evans raised an eyebrow but nodded his permission, a silent acknowledgement of the changed dynamics between them. The Evans garden was a carefully tended oasis, with roses, hollyhocks, and native plants arranged around a small fountain. The evening air was cool but pleasant, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "What did my father say to you?" Olivia asked once they were alone, her hand resting lightly on Dax's arm. "He expressed concern about the match," Dax replied honestly, "as any father would. And we reached an understanding. 6 months' time for me to establish myself somewhere stable, prove I can provide for you properly." Olivia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. 6 months? It's reasonable, Olivia. We've known each other less than a week. "I know my own heart," she said firmly. Dax smiled, reaching up to touch her cheek gently. "As do I. But your father's right about one thing: you deserve security as well as love. I want to be able to offer you both." She leaned into his touch. "What will you do?" "I'm thinking about that ranch near Chisholm, and maybe talking to Sheriff Wilson about deputy work." He searched her face. "How would you feel about living there? It's not Santa Fe." "I told you before, I miss ranch life," she said. "The open spaces, the freedom. I've been suffocating in city drawing rooms." Hope bloomed in Dax's chest. "It won't be easy at first. The house needs work, and starting a ranch takes capital." "We'll manage," she said with such certainty that he couldn't help but believe her. They continued walking, discussing practical matters: how soon Dax would return to Chisholm Ranch, how they would correspond during their separation, when Olivia might visit to see the property. The mundane details of planning a future together felt more intimate, somehow, than their earlier moments of high emotion. As they completed their circuit of the garden, returning to the house where Judge Evans waited on the porch, Dax stopped and took both of Olivia's hands in his. 6 months will pass quickly," he said softly. "And then, if you still feel the same." Olivia smiled, her eyes shining in the starlight. "I will." Dax would leave Santa Fe the next morning, carrying with him Judge Evans' conditional blessing and Olivia's promise to write weekly. The 6 months ahead would be filled with hard work, challenges, and occasional setbacks, but also with growing anticipation as their planned future took shape. True to his word, Dax purchased the small ranch outside Chisholm Ranch, working tirelessly to repair the house and outbuildings. Sheriff Wilson, impressed by his handling of the Harker gang, offered him a position as deputy work that complemented his efforts on the ranch while providing steady income. Olivia, meanwhile, threw herself into preparations, learning everything she could about modern ranching techniques, household management, and the changing dynamics of the territory as it moved toward statehood. Her father, seeing her genuine happiness and determination, gradually warmed to the idea of her future with Dax. By the 3rd month of their separation, he was actively helping with legal matters related to the ranch purchase and water rights. Their letters sustained them, Dax's brief, but heartfelt, Olivia's long and detailed, both counting down the days until their agreement with Judge Evans would be fulfilled. They arranged 2 visits during the 6 months, Olivia traveling to Chisholm Ranch with a proper chaperone to see the progress on what would be their home, Dax returning to Santa Fe for a territory-wide law enforcement conference, where he impressed many with his practical knowledge of tracking and criminal behavior. By the time the 6 months drew to a close, Dax had transformed the run-down property into a functioning ranch with a comfortable, if modest, home. He had established himself as a respected deputy in Chisholm Ranch, his past as a bounty hunter lending him authority rather than suspicion. The transition had not been without challenges, but he had met them with the same determination that had carried him through the war and the difficult years that followed. And on a crisp October day in 1878, exactly 6 months after they had parted in Santa Fe. Dax stood on the platform of the Chisholm Ranch station, watching the approaching train with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness that surpassed anything he had felt facing armed outlaws. The train whistle sounded once, twice as it slowed for the station. Steam billowed around the platform as the locomotive came to a halt and passengers began to disembark. Dax's eyes searched anxiously until finally he saw her Olivia, more beautiful than his memory had preserved, stepping down from the passenger car with a radiant smile. He moved forward, barely aware of the other travelers around them, his focus entirely on the woman who had changed his life in ways he was still discovering. "Olivia," he said, the name a prayer on his lips. "Dax," she replied, her voice carrying all the longing of their months apart. "I'm home." And as he took her in his arms there on the platform, heedless of onlookers, Dax knew with absolute certainty that his wandering days were over. The trail that had begun with an ambush and a rescue had led him to where he was always meant to be with Olivia, building a life together in this corner of the Wild West that they would tame with love. That night, under a canopy of stars that seemed to bless their reunion, Dax finally placed his mother's ring on Olivia's finger, sealing a promise that had begun on a dusty trail when a bounty hunter had saved a judge's daughter and found his own salvation in the process. Their wedding, held in the newly completed church at Chisholm Ranch, united not just two people but two worlds: Judge Evans and his Santa Fe colleagues mingling with ranchers, deputies, and townspeople who had come to respect the former bounty hunter and welcome his bride. "Mrs. Wilson cried openly during the ceremony, while Sheriff Wilson stood proudly as Dax's best man, evidence of the community that had embraced them both. As years passed, the Xavier Ranch prospered, growing from 200 acres to over 1,000. Dax continued his work in law enforcement, eventually becoming sheriff when Wilson retired. Olivia established a small school on their property, teaching the children of neighboring ranches alongside their own 3 boys, and a girl who inherited their father's steady courage and their mother's compassionate heart. And sometimes, on clear evenings when the day's work was done, Dax and Olivia would sit on the porch of the home they had built together, watching the sunset paint the high desert in gold and crimson. In those quiet moments, they would remember the unlikely journey that had brought them together, a desperate ambush on a lonely trail that had led, against all odds, to a lifetime of love.